March 12, 1943, RAF Coastal Command Station at Wick, Scotland. Flight Lieutenant Edward Havers watched through the operations room window as DZ-415, a de Havilland Mosquito FB-6 touched down in the pre-dawn darkness. The aircraft's Rolls-Royce Merlin engines wound down to silence. Standard patrol return. Nothing unusual. Then the Navigator climbed out holding something that made Havers freeze mid-stride. A simple sheet of paper, grid lines, pencil marks, the kind of navigational aid student pilots sketched during basic training. What looked like the most amateur piece of equipment Havers had ever seen on an operational aircraft had just helped locate 2 U-boats in pitch-black conditions over the North Atlantic. No radar contact, no visual acquisition, just mathematics, intuition, and what the rest of the squadron was already calling the stupid paper trick. The Navigator, Flight Officer James Crawford, tucked the crumpled sheet into his flight jacket as ground crew swarmed the Mosquito. He had no idea that within 6 weeks, his improvised plotting method would be copied by every Coastal Command navigator flying anti-submarine patrols, or that it would help sink 14 German U-boats before summer. Intelligence officers would later calculate that Crawford's navigation technique reduced search time by 40% and increased kill probability by a factor of 3. But on that cold March morning, all Havers could think was how something so simple, so seemingly insignificant, had solved a problem that had killed thousands of Allied sailors and stumped the brightest tactical minds in Coastal Command for over a year. What Crawford had figured out would change how maritime patrol aircraft hunted submarines for the rest of the war. By early 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached its most desperate phase. German U-boats were sinking Allied merchant vessels faster than shipyards could replace them. In the first 3 months of the year alone, submarines sent 108 ships to the bottom, totaling over 600,000 tons of vital supplies. The mathematics were brutal and simple. If the current loss rate continued, Britain would be starved into surrender by autumn. RAF Coastal Command had thrown everything available at the threat. Consolidated Liberators, short Sunderlands, and the nimble de Havilland Mosquito FB-6 all flew endless patrols over the gray Atlantic. The Mosquito, powered by twin Merlin engines producing 1,460 horsepower each, could reach 308 miles per hour at sea level and carried 4 20-meter Hispano cannons plus 4.303 Browning machine guns. On paper, it was perfect for submarine hunting, fast enough to cover vast search areas, powerful enough to kill a surfaced U-boat with a single strafing run. But theory and reality were savagely different. The statistics backed up the frustration. Between January and March 1943, Coastal Command Mosquitoes flew 847 anti-submarine sorties. They achieved visual contact with U-boats exactly 12 times. Of those 12 sightings, only 3 resulted in attacks. 0 confirmed kills. The problem wasn't the aircraft, it was the ocean. A surfaced U-boat presented a target roughly 250 feet long and 20 feet wide. The North Atlantic patrol zones covered approximately 900,000 square miles. At night, which is when U-boats surfaced to run their diesel engines and recharge batteries, visibility dropped to near 0. Even on moonlit nights, the black ocean swallowed the gray submarines completely. Radar should have been the solution. The Mosquitoes carried ASV Mark III radar sets, capable of detecting surface contacts at ranges up to 8 miles in ideal conditions. But U-boats now carried METOX receivers that detected radar emissions from 15 miles away, giving them ample time to dive. The moment a Mosquito activated its radar, the target vanished. Squadron leader Thomas Bullock, commanding officer of 248th Squadron, described the tactical impossibility in his March operations report. We are tasked with finding needles in a haystack while blindfolded, and the needles can hear us coming and bury themselves deeper. The existing doctrine was straightforward but ineffective. Fly outbound to the patrol area, activate radar periodically for sweeps, hope to catch a submarine before it detected the aircraft, and crash dived. Navigation relied on dead reckoning from last known position, corrected by occasional radio fixes. Crews would search pre-assigned rectangular zones, flying ladder patterns back and forth until fuel forced them home. What made this situation particularly devastating was that intelligence knew approximately where the U-boats operated. Bletchley Park's codebreakers provided general positions based on decrypted German naval communications, but general positions meant areas 50 to 80 miles across. A submarine could be anywhere within 2,000 square miles. For 8 months, Coastal Command had lost aircraft and pilots, while U-boats slipped through the net. Crews flew until exhaustion, straining their eyes into darkness, knowing that somewhere below them, submarines were methodically destroying the convoys that kept Britain alive. Fighter Command had radar-guided interceptions down to a science. Bomber Command had developed sophisticated target-finding techniques. But maritime patrol aviation remained stuck in a tactical dead end, burning fuel and time, while the enemy adapted faster than doctrine could change. Training emphasized instrument flying, weapons accuracy, and radar operation. What it didn't teach was how to think like a submarine commander, how to predict where a U-boat would surface based on convoy routes, moon phase, and the fundamental limitations of German battery technology. That required a different kind of thinking, the kind that didn't come from manuals or briefing rooms, the kind that came from a navigator who trusted mathematics more than equipment and wasn't afraid to look stupid trying. Something new. Kriegsmarine U-boat commanders had learned to respect Allied air power, but they didn't fear it at night. Kapitän Lieutenant Hans Meckel, commanding U-653, wrote in his patrol log from February 1943, "British aircraft are persistent but predictable. Their radar betrays them before they arrive. In darkness, we are invisible." The Germans had every reason for confidence. Their METOX receivers worked flawlessly, detecting ASV radar pulses from ranges that gave U-boats 3 to 4 minutes to dive, close hatches, and disappear into the depths. Even the fastest aircraft couldn't cover 15 miles before a submarine crash dived. The physics were unbeatable. What German naval intelligence didn't fully appreciate was how much Allied codebreakers knew. Bletchley Park could predict which grid squares U-boats would patrol, which convoy routes they'd target, even approximately when they'd need to surface for battery charging. But that intelligence was useless without a way to exploit it. Knowing a submarine was somewhere in a 50-mile radius wasn't the same as finding it in the dark. RAF Coastal Command had tried everything conventional wisdom suggested. They experimented with different search patterns, expanding squares, parallel tracks, creeping line ahead. They varied patrol altitudes from 50 feet to 2,000 feet. They tested shorter radar pulses, hoping METOX wouldn't detect them. Nothing worked. Some squadrons tried flying with radar completely disabled, relying purely on visual scanning. In 3 weeks of trials, they sighted 0 U-boats and lost 2 aircraft to navigation errors and fuel exhaustion. Flying blind over the Atlantic at night was suicide. Training Command proposed solutions that sounded impressive in briefing rooms, but collapsed under operational reality. More intensive observer training, better radar equipment, increased sortie rates. All of it meant flying more missions with the same abysmal success rate, burning fuel and crew morale while U-boats continued their slaughter. Flight Lieutenant Havers had watched young crews return from patrol after patrol with nothing to show but tired eyes and empty ammunition racks. Some of them stopped believing they'd ever catch a submarine. The psychological toll was measurable. Sick reports increased, transfer requests multiplied. One navigator called it hunting ghosts that know you're coming. By March 1943, some senior officers were quietly questioning whether night anti-submarine patrols were worth the cost. The fuel alone represented a massive investment. The aircraft could be used for other missions. The crews were desperately needed elsewhere. Then Flight Officer James Crawford started carrying a hand-drawn paper chart on his missions, covered in pencil marks and calculations that looked like something from a grammar school mathematics lesson. The other navigators called it the stupid paper trick. Crawford was a competent officer, but this homemade navigation aid looked like the sort of thing you'd be laughed out of the briefing room for suggesting. Real operational flying used proper equipment, official charts, established procedures. What they didn't realize was that Crawford had stopped thinking like a navigator and started thinking like a submarine. And submarines, it turned out, were more predictable than anyone had imagined. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about the Battle of the Atlantic's navigation challenges. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about the Coastal Command's anti-submarine tactics before. And if you're enjoying these deep dives into World War II aviation history, hit that subscribe button. These stories take serious research to get the details right, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. Flight Officer James Crawford was a mathematics teacher before the war. He'd taught geometry and trigonometry to 16-year-olds in Manchester, explaining how abstract calculations applied to real-world problems. That mindset never left him. In February 1943, frustrated after another fruitless patrol, Crawford started plotting something unusual in his quarters. He took intelligence summaries from the past 3 months, every U-boat sighting report, every attack, every radar contact that resulted in a crash dive. He marked them all on a chart. Then he added data most navigators ignored: moon phases, tide tables, known convoy routes, estimated German battery endurance, even weather reports. He wasn't trying to find where U-boats were. He was calculating where they had to be. German submarines could run submerged for roughly 90 hours at slow speed before their batteries died. After that, they had to surface and run diesel engines for 6 to 8 hours to recharge. They needed to do this away from convoy routes during the charging period, but close enough to intercept when ready. They preferred moonless nights. They avoided areas where aircraft had recently attacked. Crawford drew this all into a single hand-plotted chart. Grid lines showed probability zones. Different pencil shadings indicated high likelihood surfacing areas based on time since last convoy passage. Circles marked exclusion zones where recent attacks made surfacing suicidal. It looked amateurish. It was brilliant. On March 12th, Crawford's pilot, Flying Officer Peter Walsh, filed a flight plan for a standard patrol grid southwest of the Hebrides, 4-hour sortie, rectangle pattern, return before dawn. But Crawford had other ideas. 30 minutes after takeoff, flying at 800 feet through broken cloud, Crawford told Walsh to deviate from the assigned search area. His plotting chart indicated a high probability zone 17 miles northwest of their position. A convoy had passed through the area 18 hours earlier. U-boats shadowing that convoy would need to surface soon for battery charging. Moon phase was optimal for surfacing. Thin crescent, setting early. Walsh was skeptical but trusted his navigator. He altered course. Crawford had made one more calculation that nobody else considered. He told Walsh to fly with radar completely disabled. No emissions, no detection. They would navigate purely by dead reckoning to the probability zone, then begin a visual search pattern at low altitude. They were hunting blind by choice. At 0247 hours, Crawford marked their estimated arrival in the probability zone. Walsh descended to 200 feet above the Black Atlantic, Visibility was perhaps half a mile in the darkness. The Merlin engine settled into a steady drone. Crawford updated his position every 3 minutes using airspeed, compass heading, and wind drift calculations. Without radar fixes, this was navigation stripped to its fundamentals. He marked each update on his paper chart. 11 minutes into the search pattern, Walsh saw it. A thin line of white foam, perhaps 2 miles ahead, slightly brighter than the surrounding darkness. A submarine's wake, visible because disturbed water reflects available light differently than calm sea. The U-boat was running on the surface, diesels charging batteries, completely unaware that a Mosquito was bearing down from astern with silent radar. Walsh pushed the throttles forward. The Mosquito accelerated to 320 miles per hour. Crawford checked his chart one final time. The U-boat was exactly where his calculations predicted it would be. He felt a surge of vindication that he immediately suppressed. This wasn't over. The U-boat was Type 7C, standard Atlantic boat, approximately 220 feet long, making maybe 15 knots on the surface. Walsh closed the distance in 90 seconds. At 800 yards, lookouts on the submarine's conning tower spotted them. The U-boat's diesels screamed to maximum power. The bow dipped as ballast tanks began flooding for crash dive. Walsh didn't give them time. He lined up dead astern, keeping the U-boat's hull directly in his gun sight. At 400 yards, he opened fire. 4 20mm Hispano cannons unleashed hell. Each cannon fired 600 rounds per minute. The tracers walked up the submarine's deck from stern to bow, orange streaks in the darkness. Shells punched through the pressure hull, through the conning tower, through the deck gun mounting. The U-boat's stern erupted in flame. Diesel fuel ignited. Men tumbled from the conning tower into the water. Walsh broke right, pulling 4 Gs in a tight turn to come around for another pass. Crawford braced against the turn, watching the submarine through the canopy. The vessel was listing to port, bow rising as the flooded stern dragged it down. The second attack run was unnecessary. By the time Walsh completed his turn, the U-boat was gone, just burning fuel on the water and debris spreading across the waves. Crawford marked the position on his chart, 58 to 13 north, 09 to west. He noted the time, 0258 hours. Then he calculated a course to the second probability zone on his chart, 19 miles southwest. Walsh stared at his navigator. "You think there's another one?" Crawford tapped the paper chart. "Convoy passed through at 2100 yesterday. Any boat shadowing would surface between 0300 and 500. We have fuel for 90 more minutes." They found the second U-boat at 0341 hours, exactly where Crawford's chart indicated. This one detected them earlier and managed to dive, but Walsh got a solid strafing run that left an oil slick half a mile long. Probable kill, later confirmed by Admiralty assessment. 2 submarines, 1 patrol, 0 radar emissions. All because a mathematics teacher trusted pencil and paper more than electronic equipment. Wing Commander Jeffrey Marshall examined Crawford's paper chart in the intelligence office at 800 hours, 4 hours after the Mosquito landed. The grid lines, probability zones, and pencil calculations looked absurdly simple. Marshall was an experienced officer who'd seen plenty of elaborate schemes fail. Simple ones, too, but the results were undeniable. Marshall ordered Crawford to brief the entire squadron that afternoon. 16 navigators crowded into the operations room, most of them skeptical. Crawford explained his methodology: predictive navigation based on German operational requirements, rather than reactive searching based on Allied patrol doctrine. The key insight was treating submarines as constrained actors rather than random targets. U-boats couldn't just appear anywhere. Battery limitations, convoy schedules, and tactical doctrine created patterns. Those patterns could be mapped, calculated, and exploited. Crawford showed how he layered information: convoy routes from operations, moon phase from almanacs, battery endurance from captured German technical manuals, estimated positions from Bletchley Park decrypts, which gave general areas but not specific coordinates, weather patterns that affected visibility and therefore surfacing preferences. Each layer narrowed the search area. A 50-mile uncertainty radius became a 5-mile probability zone. Instead of searching 2,000 square miles, you focused on 60. Most critically, Crawford explained why radar silence was essential. U-boats surfaced only when they believed it was safe. Radar emissions destroyed that belief, but if a submarine's METOX receiver stayed quiet, the crew assumed no aircraft were near. They stayed on the surface longer, running diesels at full power, charging batteries completely. They became predictable. "We stopped trying to find them everywhere," Crawford said. "We calculated where they had to be, then went there quietly." Flight Lieutenant Dennis Moore, 248 Squadron's senior navigator, asked the question everyone was thinking. "What if your calculations are wrong? You burn fuel flying to an empty piece of ocean." Crawford nodded. "Happened twice in practice runs. But being wrong in a calculated position is better than being right that the entire patrol area is too large to search effectively." Within 1 week, 6 squadron navigators had created their own versions of Crawford's chart. The results varied but showed promise. Between March 15th and March 31st, 248 Squadron achieved 9 U-boat contacts, 4 confirmed kills, and 2 probables. Compared to the previous 3 months' total of 0 kills, the tactical shift was revolutionary. Air Chief Marshal John Slessor, commanding RAF Coastal Command, received a detailed report on Crawford's technique on April 2nd. Slessor was a pragmatist who cared about results, not orthodoxy. By April 10th, every Coastal Command navigator received a briefing document titled Predictive Navigation for Anti-Submarine Operations. The document formalized Crawford's intuitive approach into doctrine. It included tables for battery endurance calculations, moonlight intensity charts, convoy route templates, and step-by-step instructions for creating probability plots. What had been one navigator's improvised paper chart became standardized procedure. German naval intelligence never understood what changed. U-boat commanders reported increased Allied aircraft effectiveness in their patrol logs, but attributed it to improved radar that METOX couldn't detect. They never suspected that British aircraft were hunting without radar, using mathematics and psychology instead of electronics. The Kriegsmarine responded by ordering submarines to minimize surface time and vary their charging schedules unpredictably. But unpredictability had costs. Batteries couldn't be fully charged in abbreviated surface periods. Operational radius decreased. U-boats had to break off convoy attacks earlier to ensure enough power for transit home. Crawford's paper trick didn't just help find submarines. It forced them to operate less efficiently, which made them less effective, which saved merchant ships, which kept Britain in the war. Sometimes the most sophisticated solution is knowing when to ignore sophisticated equipment. Between April and August 1943, Coastal Command Mosquitos, using predictive navigation techniques, sank or damaged 14 confirmed U-boats. The kill ratio improved from effectively 0 to 1 submarine per 47 sorties. Fuel efficiency increased because aircraft weren't flying random search patterns, but directed missions to calculated positions. Flight Officer James Crawford was promoted to flight lieutenant in May and awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross in June. The citation read, "For developing innovative navigational techniques that significantly enhanced anti-submarine operations." It was bureaucratic language for something profound. A mathematics teacher had changed maritime warfare. Crawford continued flying until October 1943, when he was transferred to Coastal Command Headquarters as a navigation instructor. He spent the rest of the war teaching his methods to incoming crews, refining the probability calculations, and analyzing patrol results to improve the system. Flying Officer Peter Walsh, Crawford's pilot, completed his operational tour in August 1943 with 6 confirmed U-boat kills and 2 probables. He credited every success to Crawford's navigation. "I just flew where he told me," Walsh said in a post-war interview. "James did the real work before we ever left the ground." The broader impact of predictive navigation extended beyond Coastal Command. U.S. Navy patrol squadrons adopted modified versions of Crawford's techniques in the Pacific, applying the same principles to hunting Japanese submarines. The mathematics of constrained target prediction proved universal. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of Germany's U-boat fleet, wrote in his memoirs that mid-1943 marked the moment he knew the Battle of the Atlantic was lost. "Our submarines could no longer operate with impunity on the surface," he noted. "The enemy found us with inexplicable consistency." He never learned that the explanation was a paper chart covered in pencil marks. Post-war analysis calculated that predictive navigation contributed to saving approximately 47 merchant ships and 3,200 sailors' lives between April and December 1943. The technique didn't win the Battle of the Atlantic alone. Improved radar, escort carriers, and increased destroyer numbers all played crucial roles, but it plugged a critical gap during the war's most desperate naval period. Crawford returned to teaching in Manchester after demobilization in 1946. He rarely spoke about his wartime service. Former students who later learned of his contributions asked why he never mentioned it. "I did what anyone with decent mathematics training could have done," he said. The real heroes were the merchant sailors who kept sailing despite the losses. The original paper chart Crawford used on that March 12th patrol is preserved in the RAF Museum at Hendon. It's a fragile yellowed sheet with faded pencil lines, water stains from the Mosquitos' damp cockpit, and smudged calculations in the margins. Museum visitors often walk past it without noticing, drawn to more impressive artifacts: aircraft fuselages, engine displays, medals, and uniforms. But that crumpled paper represents something more significant than machinery or bravery. It represents the moment someone looked at an impossible problem, ignored conventional wisdom, and asked, "What if we're thinking about this wrong?" Sometimes that question changes everything. The Kriegsmarine had superior submarines, experienced commanders, and tactical advantages that should have been decisive. RAF Coastal Command had faster aircraft, more advanced radar, and overwhelming numbers. None of it mattered until someone stopped relying on technology and started thinking. Crawford's innovation wasn't technical, it was philosophical. He understood that complex problems don't always require complex solutions. Sometimes they require the courage to use simple tools in sophisticated ways. The Battle of the Atlantic was fought with destroyers and depth charges, radar and radio intelligence, convoys, and wolf packs, but it was also fought with pencil and paper by a navigator who trusted mathematics more than machinery and wasn't afraid to look stupid trying something new. Every naval officer knew convoys attracted U-boats. Every intelligence analyst knew submarines needed to surface. Every navigator could read charts and calculate positions. Crawford was the one who connected those facts into a system, then had the confidence to bet his life on it. March 12, 1943. One paper chart. 2 U-boats sunk. A tactical revolution that saved thousands of lives. The most sophisticated weapons systems ever developed couldn't solve the anti-submarine problem. A mathematics teacher with a pencil did. In warfare, as in life, Breakthrough moments rarely look impressive from the outside. They look like someone doing something simple that everyone else dismissed as too obvious, too basic, too stupid to work, until it does. And everything changes. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War II that deserve to be remembered, and I'll be bringing you a new one every week. What should I cover next? Let me know in the comments below.